So, Mac, this is it.
This is the one.
Yeah. 2009. What was it? 2000, I keep on thinking it was 2010.
2010.
How long did it take you? And it was at London, Cape Town.
London to Cape Town.
Yeah.
It was 11 days, 14 hours, 11 minutes or something like that.
Do you still hold the record?
No, it's been beaten twice since, mainly because the road between Egypt and Sudan is now open. Before, you had to go on a ferry down Lake Nasser, and that stretch alone, because there were passenger ferries which would take an overnight, but the cars had to go on a barge, and because the barge didn't have any navigation lights, it basically meant it took 2 days. It couldn't carry on travelling through the night. So when we did it, that route wasn't an option. We would have used up 2 or 3 days just to do that little 250-mile stretch, and the record was 13, so I couldn't afford to use up that going that way. So we went via Saudi and Sudan, so we went kind of a long way around. But since then, that road has now been opened, and you can now drive from Egypt to Sudan. And so it got beaten. Ours was sort of 11.5 days. It then went down to about 11 days. It's now 10.5 days. But those teams both went through Libya, which is now a complete no-go. And we went through Syria, which is a no-go. Okay. So, yeah.
Now, apart from the obvious roll bar,
absolutely.
Your work on the vehicle to get it ready for the trip from a standard, which motor has it got?
It's a TDi5.
Right.
Not my first choice. I would sooner go with a 300 TDi. But this vehicle is what, 8-9 inches longer at the back, and of course the key for us was you drive, you navigate, and then you sleep. You had to have a good place to try and sleep, and all the team were around about the 6-foot mark, and so with the extra length of the Discovery-2 we could get a full length bed in the back and get a proper night's sleep. Otherwise you're kind of curled up in a ball sleeping across. There just wasn't enough room, so therefore we had to go with a TD5 engine. But the thing we did was we tried to simplify it. So it's the S model. It did, though, if you look and peer through the window there, you'll see it's a left-hand drive.
I saw that.
Yeah, because we did a recce in my other vehicle, which unfortunately has since died. But because we went via Saudi Arabia, there was a ferry across to Sudan. Well, we knew that we had to be at the ferry port. We were told we had to be there sort of like 11 in the morning. Well, and it only sailed on a Wednesday and a Sunday, I think it was. Well, that's great, but there's no TomTom or Garmin route to tell you what time to leave London. And the clock starts here and carries on ticking. So the only way to know exactly when to arrive at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday morning is to go and do it and then work backwards. And so I drove out there with my other vehicle that I was going to use. It was an ex-police vehicle. It only had sort of like 10,000 miles on the clock, new engine. So that was the plan. Drove all the way out there, got to the Saudi border. We were allowed in, and the customs officers just stood there and shook their heads and went, "Can't come in, steering wheel's on the wrong side." I said, "You were sponsored by Land Rover Saudi Arabia." They had no idea that right-hand drive vehicles were banned. So hence getting this one. But it meant that our start point was 9 o'clock on a Saturday night. And that was determined by having driven all the way down there and driven all the way back, logged everything and the border crossings. How long does it take to get through each border? It's not like just, show your passport. There's a lot of paperwork, toing and froing, taxes, permits, carnets, the lot. So, yeah, that's why it's left-hand drive.
You wanted to keep it light. You mentioned before that the amount of fuel you were carrying, the amount of water you were carrying.
Yeah.
How heavy were you?
We were still pretty heavy. We had to carry food. We used boil-in-the-bag meals, military rations, pre-cooked. And what you do is you just pack them round the TD5 engine while you're driving. So every time you change drivers, you pop the bonnet, hot food out, cold food in, go. So all you need is a spoon and some sterilising wipes, because obviously if you don't clean the spoon, you make yourself sick, and therefore you get dehydrated. So that was the food. So we carried quite a lot of food. It meant we didn't have to stop. We always had some, and it was always being heated while we drove. We did carry spares. We carried an alternator, we carried a fuel pump, water pump, air filters, kind of belts, kind of the general stuff. We carried 2 spare tyres. The Pirelli all-terrains, we had steel rims, not these alloys, but the steels, obviously, they take more of a pounding. You can hammer them straight if you dink them by hitting a pothole. But more importantly, in the middle of Africa, who is going to be able to weld alloy? Nobody. You know, you'll find a welder, steel welder, in almost every village. So if push comes to shove, we didn't even have a roof rack. We just strapped the second spare down and tied it down on, so it just sat on the roof on a bit of roll mat on there. So yeah, didn't really do much. I can show you. Yeah, with the suspension, the S model in the UK is coil springs front and rear. This is a 5-seater, but for some reason, because it's left-hand drive, it came from France. It had air at the back, not coils. So that was the. I kind of was weighing up, because there's some train of thought was the air would be more comfortable for the person sleeping. It would always ride better. But when I took it to, I'm an ex-REME engineer, British Army, so when I took it to the local army barracks, they very kindly helped prepare it. We got it up on jacks after I'd bought it, and we saw that one of the springs at the front had broken. And I hadn't even known. I'd probably driven 500 miles of broken front spring. Had no idea it had snapped. And that, to me, that immediately answered any questions. We therefore must put proper solid springs on this vehicle. Because with the air, there are too many sort of the ride height sensors, the air pumps, the bags themselves. Yes, they're very quick to change compared to coil springs, and they're a lot lighter. So we changed it to, these are King springs, Australian, with a 2-inch lift. But it wasn't the lift I was worried about, because they're the same size wheels. We had 2 4.5s, not 2 3.5s. I definitely didn't put 2 6.5s on it. I just wanted something stronger. So Coney Shocks, the same ones that were used on the Top Gear Hiluxes when they did the North Pole, and I've always used Coneys if I can ever since. But what we did inside was we simplified it. So we put the Kenlow on. That was for fuel consumption, just so that wouldn't be going all the time. We disconnected the
Kenlow, the electric
fan,
and you took off the
air conditioning pump was here, but we disconnected it. It's unfortunately it still had the ACE system. We just had to hope that kind of held out. But since then, I have completely removed the ACE. I've completely removed the aircon. I don't like. The more I can strip off a vehicle and keep it basic, the better. What else did we do? Obviously, massive, great Hella spots. In here, some quite heavy-duty sort of alley mesh, in case a stone went through and took out the radiator. That's gonna stop something pretty solid. Yes. Fogs were always good, even to run when there isn't any fog, because when you go onto dip beam, you don't. Once you leave the UK, you don't really ever get to see where the edge of the road is. There's no cat's eyes. There's no real marks. So that always kept a good spread of light down low, so you could see where the curb was. But basically, we try to keep it.
To me, the message is actually you didn't do a lot to it. You just did a couple of the important things and left it at as and that's why you made it.
Yeah. Nothing
mechanically. It's
nothing
why
went
you
wrong.
You kept it light and you kept it simple.
No punctures. No nothing. So yeah, really, really basic. But we changed. We put a new clutch in. All the fluids were changed. I went up to TDi5 Alive. They kind of. We put a bigger. Oh yeah, I suppose there are some performance modifications, but that was more for fuel consumption.
Bigger than standard radiator.
Bigger intercooler in there.
Yeah.
He tweaked it a little bit. Much stronger hoses. Apparently, the top hoses on Land Rovers were a little bit prone to blowing, so much stronger hoses there. And there was another issue whereby on early TD5 engines they hadn't torqued up. God, what was it? There was an oil pump bolt or something, and they hadn't put enough sort of thread lock on it, or it wasn't the right torque. And of course, if that goes, the oil pump goes, and the whole catastrophic failure ended. So because I'd read about it, we changed it. It was all sort of precaution stuff. but the focus was on the mechanics, getting that right. As you'll see, you know, we were told by so many, you know, I used to work in Africa, so I kind of know what you do and don't need. But you'd go to a lot of these Land Rover shows and people would say, well, you cannot cross Africa without a winch. Physical impossibility. You'll never ever make it. You must have a winch. Well, you stick a winch and a massive bull bar on the front, well, you might as well just strap a fat bloke onto the front of your vehicle and watch your fuel consumption go down. We have no snorkel. You know, that also actually saps power, increases fuel consumption. Don't really need it. You know, if I'm trying to wade through water up to about this sort of depth, I don't really want to go through it in the first place. I'll find another way around. So yeah, this is you know, this was for safety. You know, we were kind of driving through the night. We were doing 4-hour shifts. You do 4 hours driving, 4 hours navigating. Not that you really needed to, because with Tracks for Africa, it was like having a tom-tom, turn by turn, and it was brilliant coming through southern Sudan. You know, you look on the map and there's a big sort of village or a town and you think, right, chuck a left for Ethiopia. You kind of assume it's going to be somewhere quite impressive as a place. There was a few little huts and it was in the middle of the night, it was all unlit. And I thought, blimey, there's not a single road sign anywhere. But Tracks for Africa, it just talked us through all these little wiggly side streets, got us out and on the main road out towards Ethiopia. Just incredible. So yeah.